Welcome back everyone to another 3D design video brought to you by the Corona Public Library's Maker Exchange. Today is a quick one. I'm showing you how to make your very own 3D printed game die, or dice if you're printing multiple. So without further ado, let's get started. As you can see, I am already loaded into Tinkercad, so the first thing I will do is rename my project. The snap grid I'm actually going to leave at 1mm since we don't need anything too accurate or specific today. And your first instinct may be to do what I did here and just insert a cube or a box. And you're right. We can simply edit this box, change the dimensions to be what we want. 20mm or 2 centimeters is quite small for a die, especially if you're trying to 3D print one. You might want it a little larger. But the cool thing about Tinkercad is it actually has a dice preset. So we can insert this and then adjust these dimensions to get just a nicer looking die. I prefer the rounded corners over the pointed corners. Even though we could technically customize it, it would be pretty labor intensive when this preset already exists. Besides, if you try to use a die with pointed corners like that, you're more likely to have pieces chip off or creating some sort of imbalance. So the rounded corners are just a bit more durable. So we've got our die, and now we need to think about, okay, how do we want to add the numbers or the symbols? Well, here I'm actually going to do kind of a traditional die. Tinkercad does have a numbers option, which some of you may have seen in our tutorial. But here I want to make it a little more like what we're used to seeing. And so here I'm actually going to make little divots or cutouts representing the numbers on the die. So we start with the cylinder, and I just adjust it to be about 10mm on all sides. And this is where the snap grid comes in handy. By leaving it 1mm, simply using either the keyboard arrows or having it move down 3 snaps, I've essentially created a 3mm thick little divot or cutout inside the die. And so now all I need to do is align it, make sure it's centered obviously, and we should be good to go. So here, my piece is now centered. I will then select that little divot, create a hole, or choose the hole option, then select both objects and group them, and you'll see the cutout. So just in case, I am going to copy and paste another cylinder here, since we want to try and keep the dots pretty uniform across all sides. So here I group them, and there you go. You've made your first side of the die. Alright, so next up we will do the 6th side. For those of you that don't know, opposite sides of a die always add up to 7. So if we did the 1 on top, then we have to do the 6 on the bottom. So I dragged over the extra cylinder we created, but you'll notice it's going to be way too wide in diameter to actually fit 6 of these. So I'm simply going to resize them to about half and then move them on over. Now, without a die being centered, it can be pretty difficult to align them. Here I'm simply copying and pasting, and the depth kind of remains the same, so I don't have to physically move it up or down on the work plane. I can just simply drag them across this flat surface here, and I've moved the camera to this angle specifically for that reason. But you could always use the keyboard arrow keys, as I do in a second, to make sure that they are aligned with each other. Now, one thing you want to be aware of is if you ever rotate the object, the up and down, quote unquote, will remain the same as it was before you rotated it. So here I didn't have that problem since I am working essentially along a face that the cylinder was already vertical. But if I had to rotate the cylinder, as you'll see in the next faces, simply dragging it around with the mouse will actually move it kind of away from our screen or into our screen, if that makes it'll make more sense in a bit. But here I've adjusted it. Select all of them, make sure they are holes, and then select the large cube and simply group them, and there you go. You've made the 6th side, and now it's time to get started on the others. Okie dokie, so here we're just going to insert more cylinders. I could have chosen any shape I wanted, by the way. You could have chosen a star, you could have chosen a cone if you if you wanted that, a pyramid. So you could have made these little divots any shape you wanted. So here I actually struggle with changing the angle, but you'll notice by moving my mouse up and down, it actually moved that object through and closer to me, if that makes sense. So that vertical axis, the up and down, now changed according to what it was based on the orientation of the cylinder. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. That little cone that comes up to adjust vertical height, that's going to be a very key tool to learn how to use effectively if you're ever having to adjust as we are now. So you'll notice I do go back to using that cone to move this 2 up and down. And here I'm just using the keyboard arrows to nudge it over to the corner. And earlier I did make sure that the shape here that I'm cutting out is 3 millimeters into the object. And I simply did that again. The snap grid is 1 millimeter. I lined it up flat on the surface and just basically snapped it in 3 times. So here, select both. Once you're satisfied, cut them out, and there you go. Opposite side, obviously, of the 2 has to be the 5. Before we get started with the opposite side there, let's just go ahead and make the 3 side since we're already here. So as before, I'm just going to adjust the cylinders I'm inserting. I don't need them to be too tall since it does make it harder to manipulate and move around. So here with the 3 side, the center one will actually, as the name implies, be centered. So I will make it slightly smaller. And it turns out I adjusted the wrong one, so let's make it back to 10 millimeters tall in this case, or long. So as I was saying, the middle dot, the center one, needs to be centered. And so to do that, I can actually use the alignment tool and then move the others based on that center object. So here, as you'll see, the mouse button or just clicking and dragging doesn't always work out. So this is when I start to realize, wait, there's a better way to line these up. So my first concern was simply getting 3 of them on there. I'm using Control-C and Control-V to paste, by the way. If you are on Mac, you can use Command-C or Command-V. And so here, the alignment tool just lets me, it's the name implies again, line it up. And now my only concern is using the keyboard arrows to adjust these as necessary. So you'll notice they are not quite lined up, so I do have to make more adjustments. But once I'm satisfied, simply select them all, group, or select the whole first, and then group them. And perfect, we've got even more sides complete. Now let's move on to the next. So by now you should be fairly familiar with this process and should be able to complete the die on your own. But just for a little bit of pointers here, as I get started on the 5 side here, reasons why you might want to make your own die. Well, as I mentioned earlier, it is fully customizable, so you can create the specific design that you want. But more importantly, if you're ever playing any specific board games, or if you want to make your own board games, you can straight up just design a die of whatever side you want. You can make it a 6-sided die, you can make it however many-sided die. I think it even has 20-sided die preset already on here. But as I said, you can customize the face of each one. You can make each one a different design. You can make each one a different shape. You can add numbers, letters, initials, names, whatever it is that you'd like. And the benefit of having it 3D printed is then you can easily reuse it either across games or across activities. And so having your own piece that you design completely on your own is very valuable, and it's something that we obviously enjoy fostering here at the Corona Public Library. We like people to be able to do their own thing. So here is the 4 side. I believe I mentioned it was the 5 side earlier. But what about those who say, well, Mr. Martin, I can just go out and buy a really nice, high-quality set of gaming dice and not have to worry about any of this? Well, yes, that's true. You can go out and purchase, a set of dice that will last you pretty much forever. But dice are very easily lost. And I think that one of the major benefits here of designing your own is not only that you get to customize it, but let's say you lose one at a friend's house, or your dog gets a hold of one and it's gone forever, or something happens to it. Well, with the design on hand, ideally stored on your computer or a flash drive, you can essentially print and customize an infinite number of these. And even though it's not going to be made of the same high quality material, since most 3D printers print with some kind of plastic, or at least for those beginners that are likely watching this video, you're most likely printing plastic. Well, again, that's a benefit of it. You have a nice light set of dice that you can then use for some time. It might not last you as long as one of those expensive sets, but you'll still have it for a while. And you can choose the material, you can choose the color of that material. And again, there's a lot of flexibility that comes with having this design on hand. So going back to our design here, I am completing the last face. And with this center dot on the 5 side, I did make sure to use the alignment tool. And now I'm just using the keyboard arrows to simply nudge each extra cutout here to its location. Now, one thing I should explain is that the reason we didn't keep these as extrusions on the face of the die is obviously when you're rolling it, you don't want those extrusions to potentially influence the randomness or the supposed randomness of a die. You want to make sure that it's pretty balanced. But you also want to make sure that it's going to roll properly. And so that's, again, the rounded corners, the divots, the cutouts going into the object as opposed to, coming 3 millimeters off of the face. These are all considerations to make when you're customizing your very own die. But here we group all the objects and create the final cutout. And there is your completed 6-sided die. Once again, there is a quick and practical 3D design project for you to take on. We hope you've enjoyed this video, and we'll see you in the next one.